Months later, Daniel stood in his studio, sunlight streaming through the windows. His latest painting, a sweeping ocean scene, captured not just pain, but resilience. It was a reflection of his journey, broken, but rebuilt stronger. Isabel visited often, bringing laughter and warmth into his days. Slowly, carefully, he allowed himself to imagine a future where love might grow again, not as a replacement for Elena, but as something entirely new. Daniel understood now that passion could ignite like fire, but trust was the foundation that sustained it. Without it, love crumbled. With it, love could endure anything. As he looked out at the horizon, Daniel whispered to himself, "This is not the end. It's the beginning." And with that, he stepped into a new chapter of his life, carrying his scars not as burdens, but as proof that he had survived. One evening, Daniel met Elena one last time. She had insisted on seeing him, claiming she needed closure. He hesitated, but agreed. They sat across from each other in the same cafe where their story had once been so alive. Elena looked fragile, weighed down by her choices. She admitted her regret fully this time, without excuses. She told him she had lost the greatest love of her life. Daniel listened in silence. His heart no longer twisted at her words, instead, there was a strange calm. He thanked her for the honesty, but told her it was too late. He couldn't go back. They parted quietly, without promises or tears. For the first time, Daniel felt truly free. Time slowly dulled the raw edges of his pain. Daniel threw himself into art again, using his heartbreak as fuel. His paintings were darker now, more complex, yet people admired them more than ever. Pain had given his work a depth that joy never could. At an exhibition, a woman approached him. Her name was Isabel, and she was drawn to his work instantly. She didn't pry into his past, but she saw the emotion in his art and respected it. Their conversations were light, refreshing, free from the heaviness he had carried. For the first time, Daniel felt something shift inside him. It wasn't love, at least not yet, but it was the possibility of life after Elena. And that possibility gave him hope. He realized that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant learning to live again, even with scars. Daniel decided to escape the city. He packed a small bag and traveled to the coast, hoping the sound of the waves would drown out his thoughts. The sea, vast and endless, reflected his inner emptiness. He walked along the shore for hours, letting the wind whip against his face. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to breathe deeply. The ocean didn't judge him. It simply existed, vast and untouchable. At night, he wrote in his journal. The words poured out of him like a flood: anger, sorrow, confusion, and fragments of love. By capturing his pain on paper, he began to reclaim a small piece of his heart. The sea couldn't erase Elena from his memory, but it reminded him of something important: life stretched far beyond his brokenness. Even as Daniel tried to move forward, the ghosts of their love haunted him. Every couple he saw holding hands reminded him of what he had lost. Every painting, every melody on the radio, seemed to echo their story. Elena reached out often, sending messages filled with apologies and declarations of regret. Sometimes he read them, other times, he deleted them without opening. Each word was a dagger, reopening wounds he wanted to heal. He avoided the places they used to go, yet somehow, he always ended up there anyway. The park bench where they first kissed. The cafe where she had laughed so loudly people turned to stare. Memories clung to him, refusing to let go. Though he was free from her lies, he wasn't free from her love. And that was the cruelest part of all. The confrontation ended with Daniel walking away. Elena's pleas followed him down the street, but he didn't turn back. His love for her was still burning, but now it burned him alive. For days, he battled with himself. Should he forgive her? Could he? Love had always been his compass, but now it felt broken, pointing him in circles he couldn't escape. At night, he imagined scenarios where they healed together, rebuilding what was broken. But every time he remembered the image of her in another man's arms, the dream dissolved. One morning, he looked in the mirror and whispered to himself, "You deserve better." It was the first step toward reclaiming the pieces of himself she had shattered. Daniel couldn't stay silent forever. One evening, he called Elena and demanded they meet. His voice was calm, but inside, his heart was a storm. When she arrived, she tried to act as though nothing was wrong. But Daniel's eyes betrayed the truth he carried. He asked her directly, "Is there someone else?" The question hung heavy in the air. Elena's silence was louder than any denial. Tears welled in her eyes, and with them, her facade crumbled. She confessed, hesitantly at first, then with a flood of words, that she had been seeing another man. She claimed it had started as friendship, but turned into something she couldn't resist. Daniel felt as though the ground had vanished beneath him. Her words pierced deeper than any blade. She begged for forgiveness, but all he could hear was the echo of betrayal. The days after the discovery passed in a haze. Daniel withdrew from the world, barely able to face his own reflection. His friends noticed his absence, but he avoided their questions. How could he explain that his heart had been stolen and broken in the same breath? The apartment felt emptier than ever. The memories of laughter, kisses, and whispered dreams lingered like ghosts. Every corner reminded him of her. Even the scent of her perfume on the pillow cut into him like a knife. He tried to paint his pain, but the canvas rejected him. His hands trembled, unable to translate his emotions into color. All he could see was the image of Elena with another man, the smile that had once been his now belonging to someone else. Daniel told himself he hated her. Yet, in the quiet of the night, he admitted the cruel truth: he still loved her. And that love was destroying him. The truth came crashing down on a quiet Thursday evening. Daniel had decided to surprise her with dinner, carrying flowers and her favorite wine. But when he reached her apartment, he froze. Through the window, he saw Elena. She wasn't alone. A man stood close to her, his hand brushing her cheek with an intimacy Daniel knew too well. Her smile, the one Daniel thought belonged only to him, was now his to witness from the outside. The flowers slipped from his hand, scattering across the pavement. The bottle shattered at his feet, but Daniel didn't notice. His world shattered louder inside his chest. He didn't knock. He didn't scream. He simply walked away, the rain masking the tears that blurred his vision. The woman he had given his soul to had betrayed him, and nothing would ever be the same again. Daniel's world became a battlefield of contradictions. By day, he convinced himself he was paranoid. By night, suspicion consumed him. Every smile Elena gave, every excuse she made, became evidence in a trial he didn't want to hold. He began following small trails, checking the times she said she was working, glancing at her messages when she wasn't looking. Each discovery only deepened the cracks in his heart. Numbers he didn't recognize, late-night absences explained too vaguely, stories that changed when retold. When he confronted her with gentle questions, Elena always countered with affection. She touched his face, whispered that he was the only one she loved, and for a moment he wanted to believe. But the sincerity that once lit her eyes had dimmed. Their love was still alive in moments of passion, but those moments no longer felt eternal. They felt borrowed, stolen from a future that might never be theirs. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by Elena's studio unannounced. The door was ajar, and inside he heard voices. Not hers alone, there was a man, his tone low and intimate. Daniel froze outside, his heart pounding. He wanted to storm in, but something stopped him. He waited until the voices grew quieter, then finally knocked. Elena opened the door, startled, her cheeks flushed. Inside, the studio was empty. She claimed she had been on the phone, but Daniel knew he had heard someone physically there. He smiled weakly, pretending to believe her, but inside, doubt wrapped tighter around his chest. That night, when he kissed her, he searched for honesty in her lips. Instead, he found hesitation. He pulled her close anyway, desperate to believe she still belonged to him. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel could no longer ignore the changes. Elena often cancelled plans last minute, her excuses piling up like bricks between them. When they were together, her laughter sounded forced, as though it belonged to someone else. Daniel began noticing details he had once overlooked: the way she guarded her phone, the hurried way she left the room to take calls, the distracted looks that stole her attention even during their most intimate moments. He told himself not to jump to conclusions. He trusted her, didn't he? Yet each night he lay awake, imagining scenarios he wished he could silence. The love that had once filled him with joy was now tainted with fear. In her paintings, too, he saw a shift. The fiery reds and warm golds gave way to colder tones, shadows and fractured shapes. It was as if her heart was painting truths she refused to say aloud. The breaking point came one rainy evening. Daniel had been waiting for Elena at the cafe where they first met, but she arrived an hour late, distracted and restless. The smile she gave him didn't reach her eyes. "Where were you?" he asked gently at first. She brushed it off, saying she had been busy painting. But something in her tone sounded rehearsed. Daniel pressed further, unable to keep his fears hidden any longer. "Elena, if there's something you're not telling me, I need to know. I can feel you slipping away." For a moment, she seemed ready to confess, her lips parting as though the truth hovered on the edge. But instead, she shook her head and whispered, "You're imagining things. I love you." She reached for his hand, but her touch felt colder than ever before. Daniel tried to accept her words, but deep inside, he knew the storm was only beginning. Over time, Daniel's unease grew harder to ignore. Elena became busier, spending more time in her studio and less time answering his calls. When he visited unannounced, she welcomed him warmly but with an underlying tension he couldn't quite name. One night, while they shared dinner, he noticed her phone lighting up repeatedly. She quickly turned it over, dismissing the messages as nothing important. Daniel wanted to believe her, but the seed of suspicion was planted. Their once endless conversations became shorter. The silences between them lengthened, no longer comfortable but heavy with questions neither dared to voice. Daniel felt her slipping away, and every attempt to hold her closer seemed to push her further. Still, when they touched, when they kissed, the fire returned, burning just as fiercely as before. It was this contradiction that tormented him. How could their passion feel so real while her presence felt so distant? Despite the occasional silences, their love continued to blaze. Daniel and Elena planned small escapes, weekend trips to the countryside, nights spent in cozy cabins where the world couldn't find them. Each escape was filled with laughter, long conversations, and nights of passion that left them breathless. Elena painted landscapes inspired by their travels, often capturing the intensity of their love in bold strokes of red and gold. Daniel collected photographs of her, candid moments when she wasn't posing but simply existing, smiling at the sunrise, lost in thought, or asleep beside him. To outsiders, they were the picture of happiness. Friends envied the connection they shared, calling them inseparable. Daniel believed it too. He told himself this was the love story he had always dreamed of, one that would last forever. And yet, every so often, he caught Elena looking away when he spoke, her smile faltering for just a second. The doubts he buried returned in whispers, reminding him that nothing perfect stays untouched. Though their love felt unshakable, cracks began to form beneath the surface. Daniel started to notice moments when Elena grew distant, lost in thoughts she didn't share. At first, he ignored it, believing that love alone would heal her silences. One evening, as they sat in her studio, he asked gently, "What's on your mind?" Elena smiled and shook her head, insisting it was nothing. But Daniel felt the weight of unspoken truths hanging in the air. Their intimacy remained strong, their passion burning brightly, yet a shadow seemed to lurk in Elena's eyes. Daniel convinced himself it was her past haunting her, a ghost she had not yet laid to rest. He promised himself he would be patient, that time would draw her closer instead of pushing her away. But deep down, he felt a flicker of unease. He didn't want to admit it, but the story they were writing together might not be as flawless as it seemed. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel and Elena built a world for themselves. They developed rituals, coffee in the morning, evening walks, messages that never stopped flowing. Every routine task became more meaningful because they shared it. Elena often invited Daniel into her studio. There, surrounded by canvases and the scent of paint, she seemed most alive. She would let him watch her work, her hands moving with confidence, her eyes glowing with passion. Daniel admired her dedication, her ability to turn raw emotion into art. Sometimes, she painted him, not with realism, but with colors that reflected how she saw his soul. Daniel, in turn, brought her into his world. He showed her the places he had traveled, the photographs he had taken, and the memories etched into his mind. Elena became his muse, his inspiration, and the reason he felt renewed. It was during these days that Daniel first whispered the words he had been holding back, "I love you." Elena froze for a moment, as though those words reopened old wounds. But then she smiled, kissed him gently, and whispered back, "I love you too." Passion soon became the thread that tied their days together. Every free moment was an excuse to meet, every glance charged with unspoken longing. They would sneak away from the noise of the world, finding hidden corners of the city to explore. Elena's laughter filled Daniel with joy, and her eyes, deep, dark, and full of mystery, kept him addicted to her presence. Their conversation shifted from small talk to deep reflections on love, art, and life. They found themselves finishing each other's sentences, as though their souls were synchronized. But it wasn't only emotional closeness that bound them. Their passion was fierce, almost overwhelming. Every touch seemed urgent, as if they feared losing each other. Nights turned into mornings, and mornings blurred into nights as they surrendered to the intensity of their connection. Friends noticed the change in Daniel. He was brighter, more alive. He didn't speak of Elena often, but when he did, his voice carried a softness that made it clear she was no ordinary woman. He had fallen, deeply and perhaps dangerously, for her. Their second meeting happened sooner than either expected. Daniel texted Elena the next day, unable to resist the pull she had on him. She responded quickly, as if she had been waiting for his message. They agreed to meet for a walk by the river. The evening was cool, the water reflecting the lights of the city in shimmering waves. Daniel brought her a single white rose, something he had bought on impulse. Elena accepted it with a soft smile, brushing her fingers against his as she took it. That small touch carried more electricity than either had anticipated. They walked for hours, sharing stories of childhood memories, ambitions, and unspoken fears. Daniel learned that Elena had left behind a complicated past, an engagement that ended painfully, leaving her unsure about love. He listened intently, feeling a desire not only to be with her but to heal the wound someone else had left behind. When they stopped to rest on a bench, their silence spoke louder than their words. Daniel leaned closer, and Elena didn't pull away. Their first kiss was hesitant but filled with intensity, like a fire waiting to spread. That night, when Daniel returned home, he couldn't erase her from his thoughts. He knew this wasn't a fleeting attraction, it was the beginning of something profound. It was a chilly autumn evening when Daniel first saw Elena. She stood at the edge of the cafe terrace, her hair catching the golden glow of the streetlights, her laughter warm enough to cut through the cold air. Daniel had no reason to notice her, he was only passing by, lost in his thoughts after another long day at work. Yet something about her presence pulled him closer, as if the city had slowed down just for them. When their eyes finally met, there was no polite smile, no casual glance to dismiss. Instead, a spark lingered between them, the kind that makes strangers feel like they have known each other all their lives. Daniel found himself sitting at her table without even realizing how it happened. Elena didn't object, in fact, she welcomed the intrusion with curiosity in her eyes. Their conversation began lightly, about the weather, the coffee, the small details of their surroundings. But within minutes, it deepened into something far more intimate. She told him about her love for painting, how colors allowed her to express emotion she could never put into words. He shared stories about his travels, the hidden corners of the world he had seen, and the loneliness that always followed him back home. By the time the cafe closed, it felt as if hours had vanished in seconds. They exchanged numbers, but more than that, they exchanged a silent promise: this was not going to be the last time. As Daniel walked away that night, he felt a rush of anticipation. He didn't just meet a woman, he had stumbled upon something dangerous, powerful, and irresistible.